Thank you. It is excellent to be back at DevWorld and to see so many new faces this year as well, which is really exciting. So I'm going to be talking about making your apps more engaging. This is a very general talk, but we'll talk about some development aspects as well. So as Paris said, my name is Zach. That is my Twitter handle. It is Zach Fitz-Walter. And I've made these slides available on my website. So if you head to zachfitzwalter.com/DW19, you can get a copy of all of these slides so you don't have to take photos if there's any slides that interest you. So a little bit about me. So I have co-founded a company recently with these two lovely gentlemen here, Mitch and Jimmy, TBD Game Company. We've released our first game ever, which is really exciting. And it may look familiar to some of you. We definitely, totally got some inspiration from a certain other game, but it is different, I swear. Mitch is going to be talking more in depth about that tomorrow, which is going to be a really good talk at 1:30, I think it is. But just a shameless plug, we do have some amazing patches available for the game, which you can get if you finish the game. Mitch has done it in half an hour, but he designed the game. It might take you a little bit longer. The other thing I do is, and this I've been doing for a much longer time now, so I've been developing iOS apps since about 2009, back when iOS 3 was a thing. And then I co-founded a company with Jimmy T, and he's going to be talking tomorrow on NFC, called Eat More Pixels. And we make apps for clients. We make apps for ourselves too, but we mostly make apps for clients. This is one we did for ourselves. It's the New South Wales Learner Logbook. It's an officially recognized logbook for learner drivers in New South Wales. This is probably the one we're most excited about. We've had almost 750,000 trips recorded by learners around New South Wales, and it is officially accepted. But what we've found is that in this day and age, app development, there's a lot of competition out there. So we're competing with people overseas, we're competing with other people in Australia. App development is done by a lot of people these days, and so we offer other services as well. And one thing that has become kind of more and more popular is this concept of an engagement review. So we have a background in user experience, in creating engaging apps, and in studying and researching those things as well. And so we've started to see more and more people coming to us and asking for an engagement review, where we sit down, we chat with them, and we're like, okay, what are your engagement goals for the app? And how can we change the app a little bit to improve your app to hit those particular engagement goals? Why are people coming to us for these particular reviews? Because honestly, the ability to engage people is one of the most important things in app design and development that you can do these days. And that is because there are a lot of apps out there and a lot of competing apps out there as well. So these days when we talk about, okay, I might be interested in developing a to-do list app, but just getting a to-do list app out there, and if you do a search for to-do list app on the App Store and see how many apps actually come up there, you're competing with a lot of other apps out there. If we have a look at some of the stats, it's quite interesting just to see how many apps on the App Store exist. And this number continues to increase. So obviously very few back in 2008, but ever since it kind of opened up and people could submit apps to the App Store, it became more and more popular. So there are a lot of apps that are available. Last month, there were 49,139 app submissions to the US App Store, so it's quite a lot of apps out there, which is on average 1,638 per day. So that's a lot of apps being submitted. There's a lot of apps that we are competing with when it comes to engaging people to use our particular app. So we need to think more about, as developers, how do we actually stand out? How do we make our app stand out? And how can we engage people to use our app over other people's apps as well? So initially I thought it was all about motivation. I was super into gamification. Who's heard of gamification before? Yeah, cool. So gamification is an interesting concept. It's about making things game-like in order to make them more engaging. And this is initially what we did our reviews based around, was how to make things more motivating. But what we realized was that, gamification can't solve everything. If we have an app which isn't very easy to use, so the usability is a bit rubbish on it, adding game elements isn't going to make that app necessarily easier to use. We've actually got to go in and fix the usability of the app. On top of that, if we create an app which hasn't got much value, so if I have an app which I've built which does something which no one really needs, then people aren't going to find that very engaging as well. And so what we found out were there were three actual areas that we were addressing engagement topics with. And that is understanding the value of what your app delivers, understanding how easy it is for people to get to that value, and then motivating people to get to that value as well. And so we came up with this model or this framework of the three pillars of engagement design. And so this, we find it quite a useful guide, both for people who are creating apps for the first time, is to think about what exactly value you provide, how easy is it to get to that value, and how do we motivate people to continue to get to that value. And also, if you have an existing app, to review your app with these 3 particular things in mind. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today, is how you can kind of think about these 3 things. And I'm going to give you an overview and some general, simple ways in which you can think about these 3 things in the apps that you create. So number 1, understanding your value. I love this slide at the WWDC every year. This both excites me and terrifies me, just because if you look at that, there's just so much that you could potentially be adding or implementing or changing within your app when the new iOS releases. So it's great. I love it, and it's terrifying. And as developers, it's very easy to focus on this stuff and get super excited about adding all of these new things to our apps. And for us as well, when we're designing our apps, I love getting caught up in the pixels. So understanding, making sure the icons look good and match up and things like that. And it's very easy as developers and designers to get caught up in our apps themselves. And often it can be easy to forget there's actually someone at the other end, other than ourselves, using our apps as well. We aren't making these apps for ourselves. We're making these apps for other people. And what's interesting is, especially with app development, is these people are often invisible to us. They're often represented by analytics or numbers. If you use Google Analytics, for us it's the engagement time, the number of downloads, etc. If you look at app analytics, it's where these people are coming from. But more often than not, they're represented by numbers. And so it can be easy to forget that these are real, breathing people who are at the other end using our apps. And for them, apps are just a means to an end. And no one really goes, "Oh, that's a really cool app, I'm going to download it." They're usually downloading an app because it helps them to achieve a particular goal, such as getting inner peace, for example, or doing something else. And when we talk about that famous statement, "there's an app for that," really, instead of focusing on the app part, it's the that part that we should be focusing on. Because these days, there really are apps for everything. It's amazing. People, originally may turn to other things. So for example, if we talk about doing yoga, right? Never, 10 years ago, I would never have thought I could download an app to do yoga, but these days I can. And it's the same for many other things. I can learn something new via apps. I can take great photos of my cooking via apps and share it with people who are really interested in it. I can get fit or work out how to, not super fit, but I can get somewhat fit by looking at apps that help me with training programs. I can learn different languages using apps. I can meet other people using apps, and I can meditate, or I can undertake yoga and things like that doing apps. So the apps these days are a great alternative. We can do so many different things as app developers, which is really exciting. Which is why it's really important to understand what value we are providing people with our apps. So the 3 things when it comes to value that we should be thinking about is, how do people identify the value of your app immediately when you have your app on the App Store? How do you know that you are delivering the value that people actually want? And can people easily share that value? So a couple of simple ways to get started. So for getting people to identify your value, you should be able to explain your value clearly. What really helps is to think about the change that you are bringing to a person's life. So rather than focusing on what your app does, think about what the changes that the app is bringing to that person's life. And then you need to be consistent in terms of talking about that particular value everywhere in terms of your advertising, your website, on the App Store, and in the app. So for us, with this round trip app, we were competing with a paper logbook, right? So for us, the value was clear. You could replace your paper logbook and record practice automatically. You didn't have to manually input it every single time. And so we were as consistent as possible when talking about how it was officially accepted. It was an actual one that you could use, and that it was as automatic as possible when it came to recording your practice. So really identify the value that you provide and make sure that you clearly communicate this in all aspects. So that's on your website, your advertising, in the actual app itself, and on the App Store page. The next thing to do is make sure that you check in with your users and get feedback. This is just to make sure that your app is actually delivering value. And so the easiest way to do this is simply just to have a feedback form that links up to some kind of ticket submission system or something where you're getting feedback from people. So it's really straightforward. We have a support and feedback button in our settings page where people can tap that and provide feedback. It seems obvious, but it is something that can be easy to forget. The other thing to do is to actually add this. So has people implemented this particular thing in your app? The SK Store review controller? Yeah, it's great. I love this controller so much because it is so easy to get immediate ratings from people about your app as well. So this you'll find if you have downloaded an app, you may see this pop up at a certain amount of time. People can just tap whatever rating star they like and then submit that, and that adds a rating to the App Store for you already. It's incredibly easy to implement, but you need to implement it at the correct time. So for example, popping it up immediately when someone opens your app, probably not a great idea because they haven't had a chance to understand what your app actually offers. Luckily, Apple provides some guidelines in terms of asking for ratings. So first thing is ask for a rating only after the user has demonstrated engagement with your app. That makes sense. So they have actually engaged with your app. They haven't just downloaded it for the first time. Ask them for a rating after they've done something with the app. And the second thing is don't interrupt the user, especially when they're performing a time-sensitive or stressful task. For our Learner Logbook, you can imagine if we started recording and then asked them immediately for a rating, it may not be the actual best time to do that. Generally, you want to think about moments of wins in your app. When someone has completed a task, has done something that's been quite nice or has been rewarding for them, or when they've got that particular value from your app, and then that's probably the best time to ask them. And the other thing is don't be a pest. And this is an actual Apple guideline. It's just don't be a pest when it comes to asking for ratings as well. Now, the other important thing is to allow people to share the value with others. There's this fantastic person called Kathy Sierra, and she presents on the kick-ass user, talking about kick-ass users. So not talking about how we make kick-ass products, but talking about how we make people more kick-ass or more amazing. And that's something to think about with your app, is that you want to deliver value which makes people amazing and that they'd be willing to share. Because if you do that, they're more likely to share it with others. So for example, this app. I love sharing this app with people. It's not my app, but it's an app that is available out there. And what's interesting is when I explain this app to other people, I'm not talking about how good the app itself is, but I'm talking about how it can let me do yoga anywhere. It lets me do a different practice every single time, and it's available for free, right? So I'm talking about how this makes me feel as a person rather than the app features itself. And obviously, implementing sharing and actions into your app makes a lot of sense if you can get people to share it when they've done something good or received value. So that's value. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with value is not just talking about value for the user, but also talking about the value for you as developers as well, because this is something we often forget about too. So what's in it for you when you make an app? So this is something to think about. There should be value for you as a programmer. Is it you're learning something new? Are you gaining income from it? You should be thinking about the value that it provides for you, otherwise there's really no point in doing it. So it's important to think about what is in it for you when it comes to value. Okay, cool, let's talk about usability, the second part of that particular pillars of engagement. So good usability is necessary when it comes to surviving on the App Store. People will leave your app if your design is difficult to use, if it is unclear what it offers, and if it's easy to get lost within your app. And the thing is, you don't want to wait until after you've developed your app in order to think about usability. Otherwise, you end up with something like this. And I love using this. I love using this example every single time. But these things still exist. And they drive me nuts. But I just love sitting and watching people trying to interact with this. Because if you look at it, it's not very straightforward. We have to go step 1, insert ticket here. Number 2, all the way up there, press button for receipt. Number 3, or number 3, or number 3.
There's also press a button for assistant.
Yes, at the top left, someone has scratched off. So that's another. Number 4, number 5, and yes, if you need trouble, have any issues, you can press the button for assister. So don't do this. Don't think about usability until after you've actually built your app. The thing is, you can get away with average or terrible usability, but only if you're the only app that provides a particular value. However, this is a very dangerous game. And I encourage you not to do this because, as we know, it's very easy to make apps these days. We have a lot of competition out there. And we need to consider that someone may make an easier to use app than we provide. Saying that, though, there is a certain parking app in Queensland, which is the only one you can use, and the usability is so bad. But I struggle through it every time because it's the only app that is allowed. So to me, usability is all about friction. The easier something is to do, the more likely we're going to do it as human beings. And the real question probably people are asking is, how long will it take me to reach my desired value with this particular app? So really, when I'm thinking about something, if I want to, for example, do yoga, I go searching for an app, I find one, I download it, I want to start doing yoga as soon as possible. But as we know, when we download an app, it's not just a matter, usually, of just downloading the app and then starting straight away with getting the value. We have to download it, we have to sign up often, we have to hit a paywall sometimes, and often there's a tutorial as well. These are just some things that may happen before I can start accessing value in particular apps. You may have different things, but these are the 4 that I find are the most common. So let's talk about simple ways to get started when it comes to fixing these things. Number 1 is to minimize your download size. Don't do this. I mean, so this is a possibility, and it makes sense for some particular apps. But the thing is, people still care about download size when it comes to your app, because we pay by megabytes or by gigabytes when it comes to our mobile data. And our mobile data is very precious for us. So people are more likely to download your app if you have a smaller size for your particular app. But what's interesting is they recently upped the cellular limit from 150 megabytes to 200 megabytes. So Apple actually put a hard limit on the downloads. But saying that though, they've now removed it completely. So you can download as much as you want over cellular. So what they do is with iOS 13, Apple will warn users when they attempt to start a large download on a mobile network, but you are allowed to override it now. So this is great if you have a large thing, because sometimes you just have larger apps that you need to download over cellular. But at the same time, don't abuse this. Keep your apps as small as possible if you can, in order to encourage people to download it. The next thing is to streamline sign up. So Jimmy raised a good point. Do you even need users to sign up with your particular app as well, or can you skip that completely? So something to think about when it comes to signing up. So if you have no reason for people to sign up to capture their data, you probably don't need to do that. Otherwise, you can streamline sign-in by using third-party sign-in options, which I love and hate. I love because, it's one tap, login, done, which is great. I don't need to create a new user password and email or account each time, but at the same time, you are giving access to these particular services. But as we know, sign-in with Apple is now coming out as well. And this is going to be mandatory for all apps with third-party sign-in options. So something to consider, that if you do use a third-party sign-in option, you'll need to start thinking about how you can add in the sign-in with Apple, which I like. I like this new thing that Apple is introducing, because, again, one touch to sign in. So this allows you to set up a user account in your system, complete with name, verified email address, and unique stable identifiers that allow the user to sign in to your app with their Apple ID, and it works over the different platforms, so iOS, macOS, tvOS, and watchOS as well. Cool. So I also love Face ID, because if I can just, especially with banking apps and things like that, if I can open the app, Face ID comes up, automatically logs in, great. It makes that whole process much easier. The other thing to think of is providing a free trial as well. So if you do have a subscription-based app or an app behind a paywall, Apple makes it really easy to implement introductory offers in your app, and this can often be the difference between someone deleting your app or actually just giving it a go for your first time. So Apple has a number of different options, including a pay-as-you-go option, a pay up front, and a free trial, in which you can provide introductory offers for people, particularly if you have subscriptions. And the other thing is to minimize tutorials as well. So we don't want someone's downloaded the app, they've signed in, they've gone through and potentially the paywall process. You don't want to hit them with a tutorial, so they have to learn all the different aspects of your app. If you can minimize tutorials or get rid of them completely, that's the best case scenario. So for example, in our round trip app, again, just to use this as an example, this is the only tutorial we have in our app. We have text which says tap the blue button below to start recording your practice, and an arrow pointing to it, and that is it. So we're directing people to the action that they're probably going to do immediately when they download this particular app. And then test early and often, otherwise you'll end up with something that looks like this. Yes. So finally, increasing motivation, the third part or the third pillar of engagement design. There are various ways to motivate. There's lots of different ways in which we can look at motivation and theories of motivation that are out there. We don't have time to go into it now. The main one I've been looking at over the last 10 years is gamification, and I love gamification because I love games. And we've seen more and more apps adding game-like elements in order to motivate people to come back to their app, to keep using their app, and to continue gaining value from their app. I just want to share two with you that I think have done it really well. First up, Zombies Run. Has anyone played or used Zombies Run? Yeah, this game's great. If you think Fitbit's motivating, I'd never found Fitbit very motivating, telling me to get 10,000 steps every day and comparing me to my friends who always do better than me. I found this one much more motivating. It puts you in a zombie apocalypse narrative every time you want to go for a run, which is very exciting. And so as you run, the narrative unfolds. You're someone who's collecting items to help survive the zombie apocalypse narrative. But then you get zombie chases. So it uses the GPS sensor to work out how fast you're running, and then you hear zombies breathing down your neck, and you've got to speed up and outrun the zombies, otherwise they capture you. It's been very popular. 4 million downloads, 29 million kilometers run, and 3.7 million zombie chases. The second one is Duolingo. I think these guys have done gamification very well as well. So Duolingo is a free app for learning another language. And they instead, if you compare it to, say, doing a class, a language learning class, or a CD, what they've done is provide a much more interactive and game-like way in order to encourage people to come back. And they've done some nice things in terms of motivational theory to encourage people to come back. Streaks is probably the most one of the biggest things which keeps people coming back. So this concept of streaks, that's coming back every single day in order to complete a particular activity. They realize that people love streaks as well. Who's got a streak in Duolingo? What are you up to?
I think 327.
327. So even just having a streak just to encourage people to come back because you don't want to break the streak. It's funny, Duolingo know this. So if you do break your streak, they will allow you to make a purchase, an in-app purchase, in order to recover your streak as well, which is it's a way to monetize it, right?
Yes, 320.
320. Wow. Anyone beat that? That's incredible. Well done. Congratulations. 320. What language are you learning? Which one? Mandarin. Nice. Over roughly 120 million users, 19 distinct languages. And Paris, did you know that you can learn Klingon as well in it? And it has almost as many learners as German and Danish. But yeah, maybe not so much English. Not English. Cool. So you can even learn Klingon in Duolingo. But gamification can be very hard to get right. So let's ignore gamification for a bit and talk about some simple ways to get started. Notifications. Notifications. People love and hate notifications. We're probably sick of notifications, and if you look at the screen time in your particular general settings on your phone, you may realize that you get a lot of notifications every day. Nonetheless, they can be a very useful way to bring people back into your app. But for notifications to work, we have to ask the user's permission when it comes to iOS. We need to let people allow or not allow for us to send you notifications. And if they hit that don't allow button, then that's it. We don't really get another chance to ask people for notifications. So if you do want to give people notifications, you've got to be careful about when you ask them for notifications. Usually, again, if we look back at when we deliver value, that's probably the best time. So after we've delivered some kind of value in our app is to think about giving people notifications. If we look at games, games are a great example. So usually when you have some kind of treasure chest which needs to be unlocked, that's when the game will say, hey, do you want me to remind you in 5 minutes to come back and unlock this treasure chest? And you say, yeah, that sounds great. I would like that. Thank you, game. And so that's when you get asked, would you like to allow for notifications? Some people get around this by doing stuff like this, where they ask you before they ask you for notifications as well. I'm in two minds about this. This is one way to get around it. It is a way, and it's a clever way, where you ask someone first, hey, don't miss the best stuff, would you like to turn on notifications? And then you present that asking for notifications. But at the same time as well, it seems a bit dodgy, but it's not. It's definitely a way to get around that. The other thing is discounts and promos. Oh, who's downloaded DD recently? All the promos. I keep going back to DD, even though I've had some interesting rides. But nonetheless, Didi use discounts quite well in order to keep people coming back and using it as an alternative to some of the other apps out there. And then finally, empathy. I love empathy. And this feels quite nice to have a bit of empathy or relatedness in your app. And I love Overcast. And I love the way that they show how many people went premium each week and also how many people have rated their particular version. And we've done this in our app as well, and we found it quite nice to show how many people have rated that version. So if you want more information on motivational apps and gamification, you can see my 2016 DevWorld talk. But those are the 3 pillars of engagement: value, usability, and motivation. You can use them to inspire your future apps or to review your own apps. If you want more, just go to that website and check out the slides and get in touch. That's it. Thank you.
So we probably have like 3 minutes for questions. If you feel comfortable taking questions.
Yeah, of course. No questions are fun.
Anyone has a question? Wave at us. Anyone have a question?
James.
Thank you, Zach. That was awesome as always. I got a sense that you feel like gamification might have peaked, or that we are kind of moving to a more, I guess, nuanced view of how gamification fits. I wonder if you had some further thoughts on where we're at with that.
Yes, so gamification, and this is one of the things where we jump to the conclusion that we need gamification often. It's like, yes, we should add points, badges, and leaderboards just because they've worked for other apps like Foursquare and Swarm and things like that. But we're realizing now that just adding those elements for the sake of adding it doesn't really work, and that it needs to be implemented properly. Just like, there's many great games out there, but there's also many terrible games as well. There's the same thing with gamification. There's many great examples of gamification like those two, but there's also many terrible examples of gamification. And so if you're going to take the time to actually invest in adding gamification, again, it needs to be providing some kind of value and needs to be implemented well. But yes, we're finding more the points, badges, and leaderboard stuff, that blueprint of gamification, not as popular these days, but more bespoke, unique gamification. And just gameful thinking. I think people are always proposing new terms. So game thinking is the next one. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
You were talking about download size.
Yeah.
So as an Android user, one thing I find is a lot of games where it looks really good.
Oh, yes.
50 megabyte download.
Yes. Yes.
Download it, super excited, you launch it, and it immediately goes into I need to download 600 megs of assets.
Yes.
Is that sort of a failed example of, or an attempt?
I mean, I guess it's a way. Yeah, good question. I guess it's a way to get around the limits that were initially imposed by stores, like the App Store, if you have 150 meg, and it makes it look good as well. But I guess that is one way to then, you're kind of committed. You've downloaded it, you really want to play the game, and it's like, you can just download this quick update. And it's a way to get people to invest in it, and then they're more likely to stick around, I guess. But at the same time, you're like, oh man, this is, it's a lot. It does feel weird as well. It does feel a little bit dodgy. But yeah, it's just one way to do it, I guess. Yeah, good question.
We have time for one more question.
One more question.
Great talk, by the way.
Thanks.
In the screen that you showed earlier in the presentation, you had a feedback email. Just out of interest, what kind of feedback do you get?
Oh, we get a range of everything. Mostly it's support questions, fixes, things like that. But for us, it's really about just things that people can't find or can't do within the app, and they give it. People love giving feedback. This is something we found. It's good to have a feedback mechanism within your app itself, and they'll give us feedback about everything, won't they? But we've got a ticketing system. We use Freshdesk, which is free. It comes automatically to that. We assign it to people, and then we can deal with it as we want. But yeah, you get everything. It's mainly just improving the app, and it helps instead of people giving feedback on the App Store itself as well. If it's 1 stars and things like that, it's better to get them to actually give you some feedback via that form. Good question.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Please join me.